Well, my body lies over the ocean. My body lies over the sea. Ooh, my body lies over the ocean. Oh, bring back my body to me. Bring back, bring back, oh, bring
And
back
welcome to the
my
Scott Arizala Show, presented by camphacker.org. My name's Travis Allison. I'm excited to be here with Scott for his show today, talking about patience. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Hi, thanks Travis. I'm Scott Arizala. I'm a summer camp consultant and trainer, and I'm excited to be the host of the show with Travis talking about patience today. One of the big skills that all of us need pretty much for any moment in life, but specifically as camp folks working with kids at camp. So when Travis and I were talking about doing this particular show, I was reminded of a moment that I had last summer that I wanted to share with everybody. For all of you camp people, the camp professionals out there, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about when I say I had one of those days at camp where, you know, first thing in the morning, by 9 o'clock in the morning, I was having to let somebody go. We had a couple of different camper disclosures of abuse over the course of the morning into the early afternoon. We had a pretty major medical incident happen in the early afternoon of that day. So you can all just imagine how it was all sort of piling on over the course of the day. And anyone who's been at camp knows, camp is already a fairly sort of dramatic and intense experience. You start piling on sort of really heavy emotional experiences like that, and of course, it can be tough. It was a tough day. And it was around dinner time. I'm not even sure I had eaten yet that day. I mean, I had been in sort of so many back-to-back sort of ongoing dramatic conversations and just experiencing this really heavy day that I was just, my tank was on empty. I was out and I was coming out of the office, headed down to the dining hall for dinner, and this poor camp counselor caught me just right at the wrong moment. And she came up to me and got basically right in my face and was really sort of aggravated and upset about something. And so, and I said, hey, what's going on? And she goes, in just like the most kind of dramatic way possible, she's like, I can't find the balloons. I was put in charge of the water balloon station for the carnival, and I can't find the balloons. And she was freaking out. And I will tell you all that in that moment, I straight up lost my cool, and you would have thought she hurt a kid or something at camp. I mean, I absolutely freaked out in that moment, and I actually had to stop myself and literally take a step back from the situation and sort of do one of the kind of timeout moments. And I took a big deep breath and I said, you know what? I'm really sorry. You didn't deserve that. I've had a really challenging day, but I understand kind of what's going on and why, you need the water balloons so badly. So let's go into the supply closet and we'll find them. And I spent, 20 minutes digging around the supply closet to help her find the balloons. And it was just one of those moments that I sort of had to reflect back on about patience and why it's so important. In that moment, this was an adult, this wasn't necessarily a kid, but being impatient, actually hurt that interaction. Being impatient actually pushed her farther away from me. She was coming to me in that moment, needing a resource and needing help, and of course that's what we want from our staff, right? I mean, we don't want them to be, we don't want them to not be able to think for themselves or do for themselves. But as we were digging through the supply closet, I actually found out she had done sort of a lot of work trying to get this balloon station ready and whatnot, and it was thrown on her in the last minute, and patience allows for that perspective. Patience allows for that kind of context. being impatient actually hurts the interaction. And frankly, when it comes to working with kids, and I think maybe even some of our adult staff, being really patient helps people learn how to sort of manage and control a lot of their situations. So I was just reminded of that, and I kind of wanted to start there because it's one of those sort of skills I believe that we all need to work on, and we need to work on a lot.
I found out over time, Scott, that what made me a better camp director was to not rush to judgment, not go with my initial reaction, but to always stop and ask staff what was going on. If there's a situation that I didn't understand, that not to assume that they were doing it wrong on purpose, but that there was some reason behind what they were doing. And it's a lesson I learned from my very first summer as a camp director, when I snapped at a staff member and she was doing something for a very valid reason. She was doing something that was really putting kids' needs ahead of her staff, like her other staff members' needs, and I learned in that moment that I need to stop and not pronounce judgment or not freak out before I took the time to ask questions of the staff to see what was going on. And also in that way, I was giving them some benefit of the doubt and showing some trust in them for what I was doing. And then just that moment of asking questions made me a much better camp director than that I started out, the way I started out.
Sure. It reminds me of something. At camp, a lot of camp folks, we talk about camp time. And anybody who's ever been to camp, both day or resident, know what we're talking about. Camp time. Time at camp is kind of weird. You spend a couple of days at camp and it feels like a week or two. You spend a week at camp, it feels like 2 or 3 weeks. You spend a whole summer at camp, it feels like you've been there for years. And you know the people there, like you're better than your family or whatever. I think that kind of plays into a little bit of what you're talking about, because it's not just this sort of long feeling of like how well you know each other, but it's sort of the intensity of what's going on. And it drives people to act in a very sort of dramatic and intense kind of way. I've seen many times, both with myself, people I've worked with, as well as camps that I'm consulting at or training at, people just in this sort of putting fires out, this immediate reaction kind of mode all the time. Don't get me wrong, when you're looking after 50, 100, 200, 800 of other people's children, sure, we need to be ready to react. We need to, we need to have best practices in place, all that kind of stuff. But the reality is 90+% of the stuff going on at camp does not need that kind of reaction. In fact, a good friend of mine, her name is Natalie King. She's the executive director at Catholic Youth Organization, or Catholic Youth Camp out in Minnesota. She says this. I think this is great. She says every time somebody comes up to her, she thinks in her head, and sometimes even asks out loud, is there fire or is there blood? And if the answer is no to both, then she knows she can take a more metered approach to whatever. Sometimes it's give the person the answer and go on with whatever she was doing. Other times it's write it down on her clipboard and keep going. Other times it's let's think about it until next session, whatever, right? But I love that, because I think it speaks to, Travis, what you were just saying. It's like the mantra behind what you were doing, which is take a big deep breath, think about, maybe ask a couple of questions first, and then react. And I think that is incredibly important and, frankly, a really great strategy to becoming more patient, which of course is what we need to do. I just want to speak to that point to begin with. I want all the camp directors and the camp youth development professionals that are watching this right now, I want to be really clear about something. I did what amounted to sort of an unscientific study at all of your camps probably 3 or 4 years ago. I did something about 40 or so camps over the course of a summer, and a lot of them were midsummer. A lot of them, the counselors or the kids were there, I should say. And I spent a lot of time documenting interactions that were going on between kids, a lot of in-depth interviewing with staff. I really wanted to sort of get this flavor of what was happening across the board. And just so everyone knows, day camps, resident camps, all boys, all girls, camps for kids with special needs, specialty camps. I mean, I really covered a lot of ground that summer. And one of the things that I had asked is like, run down for me some of your top challenges or issues that, and I'm asking, of course, the camp counselors. I will tell you straight away, number one, by far and away, was the feelings of patience. There was also this number two, which was, not really a close second, but it was up there, was homesickness. But we can talk about that some other time. By far and away, the number one issue that people felt like they had was patience. And I just thought it was so interesting, because here is every camp counselor talking to me about patience. And I will tell you, Travis, I've never once looked at a staff training schedule and saw like a whole afternoon blocked off for patience training. In fact, I've never even seen that written on a schedule before. So I thought it was interesting that that's what they're talking about. And we rarely spend more than maybe the offhand 10 or 15 minutes in training on it.
Scott, with your staff, do you set aside time to train them to be patient?
Yeah, actually, in a couple of different ways. One, I create an actual time where we're talking about the skill of patience. And I wanna talk with you about, okay, so what exactly do we train during that 20 minutes or half an hour that we're actually talking about patience as a skill? All right. But the second thing that I do, which I think is incredibly important, is every summer we outline 3, 4, 5 different themes that we're going to continually come back to over the course of training, no matter what we're talking about. Patience is always one of them. Patience is always a theme of staff training, and not theme like how we're going to dress up that day, but theme meaning for any activity that we're doing. If we're going to have debrief questions and a breakdown discussion, we're going to try and tie it back into this idea of patience and how do we practice more patient skills. If we are doing any kind of active thing where maybe like during rotations when we go out and we learn what's happening at each activity, one of the things that I try to ask our program leaders to do is set up some opportunities, quote unquote, opportunities to practice patience, meaning I want staff to know what it's like to get to an area and have to wait for getting on the giant's ladder or have to wait for being able to shoot archery. Now, we of course then talk about that, and we talk about ways, if we have to do some waiting and be patient at camp, then ways that we can keep kids engaged. But I want them to experience that as far as how hard it is as an adult to wait to go up on the giant's ladder. Can you imagine what it's like if you're 12 years old, so on and so forth. So it's that theme that we keep coming back to in training. I find that to be probably the most powerful part of sort of quote unquote patience training. The things that I talk about during that 20 minutes that we set aside to specifically talk about that skill is we run through, the sort of tried and true. You brought up one specifically, ask questions before you react. You see something going on with kids, you see something going on with other staff members. I teach two things. One, I want you to assume the best of people. This is mostly sort of more important when we're talking about our fellow coworkers. I want you to assume the best, but I want you to ask questions. All right, same with kids. You come around the corner, you see what looks like some mischievous kind of, body language. I want you to assume the best, but I want you to ask some questions. Hey guys, what's going on? What are you guys doing? But then I also, we teach, what does it look like to be patient? Exactly like what you described, right? I always use this as an example. How many of you have ever heard an adult say something like, to a kid, hey, breathe before you speak, count to 10 before you react. We hear adults say that kind of stuff to kids all the time. My next question is always, well, how many of you have ever seen an adult do that? And rarely have ever seen an adult do that. So I actually haven't practiced that. Like, you come into a situation, something is going on, physically take a step back and take a big deep breath, and then say something, right? Or, in your head, count to 10, and then say something, right? I have people practice what it's like, no blood, no fire, just like Natalie said. How then do you bring your voice down into a calm, cool place? Yeah, you can yell and scream all you want at a bunch of kids who aren't listening, But you can also say something like this. Hey guys, I'm feeling really frustrated. It seems like we've asked to get the cabin cleaned up now way too many times and it's still not happening. We've only got 10 more minutes until assembly and, the cabin is still not clean. Now, physically I did some things, but vocally and tonally I did some things. My 10-year-olds that are all this group right here, they know I'm pissed. They know I'm upset. I don't need to yell and scream. It's a more patient approach to the same kind of idea.
And I like that does one other thing too. A lesson I learned when I was a counselor from my camp director is that in a large group, the best way to get their attention is never to be louder than them. It's to be quieter than them. And she would get into that same position, get small and start talking softly. And eventually the whole crowd would lean in and be quiet and listen to hear what it was she said. Being quieter than them worked in great ways for getting a group's attention.
I love that, and it just speaks to the seriousness of the situation, right? And the tone and the whatnot. I mean that is incredibly important. And some of the episodes that we're going to be doing a bunch on we want to do a communication series. And one of the ones we'll talk about what are some of the messages that people get. And in that, we'll discuss the impact tone makes on the messages that people are hearing when you're speaking, and it's really high. It's something like 40% of the message that people get is that tone. And when you can drop your tone, when you can, as Travis was saying, be quieter, people know the seriousness of it. Especially, as a camp counselor, you're yelling and screaming and singing songs, and you're sort of gregarious and outgoing all the time, anyways. When you sort of drop that tone and speak a little bit more calmly and coolly, people know the seriousness of it. And again, it's role modeling what it really looks like to be patient. One of the things that I want staff to know, and this is another piece that we talk about in our training, is that 99.9% of behavior is not meant to piss you off. I mean, we've all had those kids that are in our groups that are like, I feel like this kid was put on the planet to push my buttons. It's just incredible how they know how to just get to me. And, one of the things I say all the time is that, look, you had nothing to do with this person being on the planet. I mean, the reality is that their behavior is not about you, it's about them. Right? So you got to sort of depersonalize some of that. It's not meant to annoy you. It seems that way. Sometimes they even say that, I am trying to annoy you or piss you off or whatever. It's for different reasons. And I think if we can depersonalize that and understand that, it's going to be a lot more effective. And the reality is that, again, you've got to really believe this underlying principle that kids push the boundaries and challenge your skill set around this idea of being patient as a way to learn what's okay, what's not okay, how to maneuver in this new culture and environment called summer camp. I mean, it's about them learning, right? That is easy to understand with most kids. It's hard to understand with that kid who it's day 3 and you've now had the same conversation with that kid about whatever bad behavior 50 times. I understand that that's a lot harder, yet I still come back to that idea. This is what they need to learn. I mean, that's what it's all about.
3 Adventures International Camp Staff.
3 things you should know about 3 Adventures. 1. Our owners are all former camp directors. 2. We're a high-quality company that's easy on your budget. 3. Background checks. Our international camp staff come from all over the world, and every one of them has had a background check. No exceptions, no excuses. 3adventures.com, the site to get great camps connected with great staff.
Scott, what is it about patience that makes it so hard to be patient?
I mean, I think it's really, what it really has to do with, I think, is that patience is not the kind of skill that you are able to master and sort of be done with it. Patience is not the kind of skill that it's like, oh, I figured out how to do it, and now I can do it every time. It's not like shooting a free throw in basketball or getting a bullseye at archery. Those things, even those, to be honest, you can't just go and just pull the trigger and do it every time. But you can sort of master them in a different way. I think with patience, you can master the sort of expressions and how you practice patience, but the reality is it's got to stay on the forefront of your mind in your interactions with kids all the time, because it's constantly being challenged in different kinds of ways. And at the end of the day, patience is just not something that you can say, oh, I'm good at that, so I don't have to work on it anymore. Patience is something that you're always going to have to work on. I think that drives that a little bit, Travis. I think the other thing that drives it a little bit is, patience plays into how you're dealing with kids and oftentimes dealing with their sort of challenging or negative behavior. And anybody we were just talking about this when we were filming the episode on bullying. The reality is that with challenging or negative behavior, there's not sort of one thing that works all the time, which again, part of that skill set is to be a really patient person and to keep coming at that kid with different ideas and sort of different suggestions and sort of different approaches around how to deal with or how to help them deal with some of the negative or challenging behavior. Patience is a part of that. Being able to sort of think clearly through those moments, even when you've been pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. That's about exercising your patience.
Well, thanks, Scott. That's very helpful and good for camp directors to keep in mind. I don't know about you, but we always found that by week 3, that's when everybody's patience was sort of wearing thin, and this is some good things to keep in mind at that point or any point in the summer when you need to dig down and pull out as much patience as you can.
Yeah, it's something that's going to wear on you all summer long. You got to practice to be better, and you've got to have a history of practicing and trying new strategies out before you get to week 3 or week 6 or week 10, when it's much easier to sort of lose it and to be short with people or so on and so forth.
Well, Scott, thank you for everything you've been teaching us today and for your thoughts about patience.
Thank you, Travis. Thanks for co-hosting. If you want to find out more about what I do, you guys can check me out at thecampcounselor.com. Again, I appreciate everybody tuning in. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you all next time.
Well, my body lies